Hello, I welcome you to another episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast with your hosts Bernhard, Guenther, and my wife Laura Matsue. This will be episode number 77. And on that note, if you're new to our podcast, please feel free to check out our past episodes. A lot of episodes and topics we talk about is really timeless, but important information and practical advice for the times we're in, how to navigate this time of transition and what's happening in the world externally and our internal process as well. Now, the topic for this episode will be how to work with projections in relationships. There'll be intimate relationships, but really any relationship, be it with friends, family, strangers, online, offline. And the reason we really want to focus on this topic in particular is because that's been something that's been coming up for people more and more, especially in these times we're in with all the polarization, the so-called splitting of humanity that we're experiencing on multidimensional levels. People of my work are aware of what I'm talking about, or if you've listened to past episodes, this timeline reality split. And the splitting between consensus state and individuated state. A lot of people going through an immense evolutionary process that is mirrored outside and within ourselves. So obviously relationships and the topic of relationships comes up for people a lot. So in this episode, we will really show you guys how to navigate the relationship realm, so to speak. And again, any relationships, be it in light of Jungian psychology, how we can easily fall into romantic projections, positive and negative projections. We'll be looking into the interrelationship between anima and animus. Is also based on Jungian psychology. It ties into the basically alchemical marriage of the inner male and female, and navigating the relationship realm in general terms. Because as I mentioned, with the times we're in right now, we see a lot of splitting within relationships. Not only intimate relationships, one partner quote unquote wakes up, the other person is still kind of in the consensus state. One person starts to individuate. A lot of friction can appear. It can happen or is happening within family and friends. And it's important to understand that this is a natural process and there's something deeper within it, something deeper we can all learn from and use relationship as a vehicle for self-realization, to learn more about yourself and all that. As a matter of fact, we also be going way deeper into this topic as well in our upcoming 12-week private group coaching program, Time of Transition, Embodied Soul Awakening. And we have new dates for this program. It will start April 11th until July 2nd. And this 12-week, 3-month online group coaching program is basically a course in psychological and spiritual self-work to activate your soul potential on multidimensional levels. And we're really combining the necessary inner work, right, based on the fourfold approach of holistic self-work, physically, emotionally, intellectually, psychologically, as well as spiritual, in context of the outer work, understanding the cosmic forces that are operating in the world, the positive, negative forces in light of the evolution of consciousness. Because this is the time we're in right now. It's been called by many esoteric traditions this time of transition, the shift of the ages. There's an awakening happening clearly, but we need to engage in the quote unquote great work, as it's called, to be the change we want to see. And obviously that's affecting relationships on a very deep level. So again, the dates for the new course are April 11th until July 2nd. There's only limited space available as always, and by application only. So feel free to go to my website, veilofreality.com, VEIL of reality.com. Under courses, you can learn more about the course, what it's all about, and then apply there as well. Just to give you a little insight or a rough overview, there will be over 47 hours of video learning material. That's original content recorded by myself and Laura, as well as over 7 hours of audio recording, including all kinds of meditation, spiritual, psychological, and contemplative practices. And most importantly, it's a in-depth group program. And it's really important to be not only around like-minded people, but be around people engaged in the same work. Because as I always say, and it's also known, there's only so much self-work you can do by yourself, because you get lost in your own tunnel vision, you don't see your own blind spots. Well, so we have been having live Zoom calls, sharing circles with course participants, coaching, guided somatic meditation calls, and Q&A calls with Laura and myself. There will be lots of written material as well on various esoteric, occult, psychological, and spiritual topics, also structured with lessons and reflective questions. A big library of various embodiment practices, meditations, yoga classes, qigong, and basically really a life-long supply of tools that you can apply in any different situation to improve the knowledge of yourself, your relationships, and the quality of your life, and really activate your deeper soul potential in these times and to help you in this individuation process. So enrollment starts now. There will be the 8th time we are hosting this course, and it's been going really well. There's a high demand, and it will also fill up before April 11th starts. So
way before
usually. Yeah. We have a high demand, going through a lot of applications. So again, go to my website, veilofreality.com, and the courses, and read more about it, fill out the applications, and we'll get back to you for more.
Okay.
With that being said, let's dive into it now.
Yeah. So how to work with projections in relationships. This is also taken from some of the course material, which are practices that we use all the time. A lot of people talk about you're projecting. They actually make a projection out of projections, actually. And you hear the word getting thrown around a lot. And I have to say that learning how to withdraw your projections and sit in that psychic emotional atmosphere of your own crap is hard. It takes grit, you know. It's so much easier to say this person did this, I'm this way because of this, I feel this way because of the world, and project our unconscious contents externally onto the world. In fact, that's the normal state of the world, is we're just constantly bombarded with other people's projections towards us, other people's projections towards other people. We're justifying our projections towards other people. So when I say projections, I mean we are placing our unconscious contents on people and situations around us without realizing that the source of them is actually within us. So withdrawing the projections that we have towards the world is really the most important tool we have towards self-knowledge and really empowering ourselves. And essentially, you know, withdrawing our shadow projections and our golden shadow, as they would say. So we both have positive and negative projections with our negative qualities that we hold within ourselves that we project on the outer world is the first step in the individuation process. So that's why it's really important. We really have a constant sense of what our projections are, develop some level of mastery and insight in dealing with our projections, because they're the first step in understanding who we truly are, basically. And then basically, Carl Jung said that the withdrawing the shadow projections is the apprentice piece, and then working with the anima-animus projections is the masterpiece. So if you're new to all of this, I'm going to really break down what that means.
Can I just preface that as well?
Yeah.
Because obviously projections, triggers, anima, animus, all of it is shadow work based on in-depth Jungian psychology. And we've said this many times, shadow work is the name of the game. The collective shadow is coming up in the world and within ourselves. Shadow meaning our unconscious material. And by the nature of it, by even its definition, we are not aware of it. But we can, if we understand how shadow work works, if we are aware of our projections, as Laura just said, we can kind of step away and observe ourselves, how we project, get triggered. We can become aware of our shadow of unconscious material and integrate it, right? And that on the deeper level really helps to, quote, heal the world as well. That's why shadow work is so important. Having said that, it's a term and idea that has also become very popular, very much diluted superficially in the way in the New Age world or pop psychology and all that, because shadow work is not easy. It's messy, right? The ego likes to avoid it. And then, like Laura said, we like to justify our projections or justify our triggers without really sincerely inquiring within.
Exactly. And I think it's important that we be more interested in our own personal projections and be concerned about other people projecting as well, because that's a projection in itself. So it's hard enough to master your own projections. I have them all the time. I can almost sense when there's psychic material coming from my personal unconscious that's more shadowy, that's more dark, and I blame it on another person that I know or tweet or whatever, you know. We're always, it's the point is that the shadow material is meant to rise up into the conscious experience, into the psyche. We usually make someone else to blame for that experience, and then we lose the possibility of integrating into our conscious mind. So every time we have a projection towards someone else, and they're this way or they're this way, or even our positive projections when we put people on pedestals, that's a moment that material from the unconscious is rising into the unconscious mind. But then what we do is we give our power away and we blame it on the other person. And then we just say, it's always the other person's fault that I'm this way. So similar to our triggers, these projections show up in our exaggerated negative or positive emotions that we have towards others. And then these projections result in us making all sorts of assumptions about the person, good and bad, and conclusions about their true character. And so we're dealing with a massive shadow dance. You know, you see it happening in the polarization in the world. I see it happening in myself, especially towards people who are really pro narrative, pro jab. You know, I have to work with it constantly. I have to work with my projections that I have towards kind of the quote unquote the other side here in this war, basically. So I'm just going to get right into it, and I'm going to download you some steps for working with projections. So first, and the most important and hardest thing to do is to recognize when there is a projection happening, meaning anytime you start to make up all these stories about this person is this and this and this way, they should be like this and this and this instead. Or if you notice yourself putting someone on a pedestal and like seeing all these almost godlike qualities in them, that's a positive projection. So you have to catch yourself when you start to tell yourself these stories, and when you start to kind of act in this either overly negative or overly positive way towards a person. And I notice they tend to be somewhat emotionally charged, and if they're not, then they're filled with all sorts of rationalizations and justifications. So that's the first step, and that's the most important step, is to notice when you're doing it and catch yourself.
Can I just add real quick? That's why I mentioned before, you know, especially people new to our podcast, go back to past episodes. There's, you know, certain things, you know, we have even the episode called, I forgot which episode it is, but how to do inner work. And what Laura mentions, the prerequisite really to any inner work, to really any sincere psychological, spiritual, esoteric work, the great work, or especially shadow work, being aware of your projections, triggers, is to be able to observe yourself, have that observer mind, be curious about yourself. Because most people, as Guenther would say, they're sleepwalking, dreaming to be awake, just mechanically engaging and indulging in projections, triggers, justifying them, getting caught in the typical matrix, victim blame trap, and all of that. So it's really key point to develop this observer.
Yeah. And, you know, there's many different practices you can do that. I definitely noticed that meditation highly has helped me develop that ability to self-observe, you know, because for a lot of people, their minds are literally chaos, basically. They have all of these thoughts going around in their head, and almost like 20 thoughts swimming around in their head at once, that it can be actually hard to distinguish like what is most important, what's a projection, you know? So learning how to also just down regulate your nervous system so that, you know, if your mind is in chaos, I guarantee you your nervous system is also in a state of fight or flight or freeze. So you have to be able to kind of relax yourself enough to get into that self-observation space. So if you, and I notice this myself, like, you know, so when I have racing thoughts, to me, that's a sign I need to basically regulate my nervous system, down regulate it, meaning like deep belly breathing, or do my meditation, or just take a break from the screen and just feel into my body, do some yoga, etc. You know, so that's key. So we need to be able to also read the signals of our nervous system, because the self-observation is very hard to do if you're in a state of fight or flight chronically or just temporarily. So you want to be able to be like, okay, what's going on with my body? Am I in a calm state? And then move into the inquiry.
Because the self-observation is not just an intellectual process, but, you know, that actually can get you more in analysis paralysis, holistic. Hence, it needs to be all based on what we also go deep on the course, this fourfold approach of holistic self-work, really integrated all levels. But yes, continue.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go back to the first steps for working with a projection. So this is when you're projecting on people around you. So, number one, recognize that there's a projection happening and what you're seeing about the person isn't the absolute truth. So that's key. So you have to kind of open your mind that your perceptions could perhaps be related to projections,
Can we just give it a concrete example?
So the biggest, so let me just finish that. So the biggest issue is we take projections to be the truth. We identify them and we miss the opportunity to use it as a form of further inquiry. So let me just think of an example. I mean, I project on people all the time, but I don't act on them as much. So keep in mind that this process, it's good to do it with a good dose of self-compassion because we're constantly projecting. And humility, exactly. And the point is to just withdraw them and self-reflect. So for example, here's a projection I could have towards someone.
This person's very selfish.
Yeah, and let me just give a more concrete example. So I'm very sensitive to tones that people use with me. I pick up a lot of psychic information. And so if I pick up the quote unquote wrong tone in someone, my immediate conclusion is they don't like me or they're a rude person or something like that. You know what I mean? The truth is that I am very overly sensitive to misattunement or different tones in people because I grew up in a very critical atmosphere. So I'm constantly expecting via my projections the world to be criticizing me in the same way that I was criticizing childhood, right? So I have all of these, I realize the projection is happening. So if someone uses the wrong tone, they could just be speaking like that. They could be having a bad day. There's many different reasons why. It doesn't mean necessarily that they don't like me. Maybe that is true that they don't like me. And then who cares as well, So you have to notice that the projection is happening and what you're seeing about the person isn't the whole truth. Meaning your perceptions and interpretations of the event, those are what you need to start unpacking, right? So all of the beliefs, thoughts, even emotions that you have come up regarding this person and situation cannot be the whole truth. So that's the first step, is recognize the projection is happening. Don't take your projections to be the truth and use it as an opportunity for further self-inquiry. And then number two is recognize that there's a difference between who this person truly is and the ideas that you're having about them in that moment.
Yeah, just wanted to add to that exactly. Just as a rough general guideline, even Carl Jung himself said, whatever we see in another person is for the most part, he even mentioned 75% to 80% our projections that have nothing to do with how the other person actually is.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And people contain multitudes within themselves, and we tend to just focus on this one thing and this one interpretation, and we have this very fixed, you can tell actually when you're projecting because your mindset and your ideas about the person get extremely fixed. So they said this and it means this, and that means that there's this kind of person or they feel this way about me, and it's literally almost like a single interpretation when there's a multitude of reasons why anyone could be doing anything, basically.
On that note also, then it gets even more activated with the projection and the trigger, and it creates a certain emotion that justifies that projection. Yeah. Right? A negative emotion, negative.
Exactly.
That's why also the idea of just trust your feelings is very ill-advised.
No, yeah.
Because most feelings are based on mechanical reactions, unconscious trauma, wounding, all kinds of mechanical behaviors that have nothing to do with the actual situation.
Yeah. Reminds me of this meme I saw lately. It's I'm an empath. I know because I make up how someone else is feeling and I immediately believe it. So, and actually, the projections often are accompanied with a strong emotion, unless you're someone who tends to suppress their emotions, and then you will immediately launch into rationalization. So it's different for each person, and we need to kind of walk a fine line with that. So, so recognize there's a difference between who this person truly is and the ideas you have about them, and then be curious about your projections and the interpretations you have coming up instead of taking them to be fact. So use the intensity of the energy that you're feeling to remind you that this is a signal that there's something within me that's unresolved, and it just gets activated by this event, this person, whatever it is they said, etc. Right? And then we do further self-inquiry. And I do this actually in the moment whenever I get triggered or I have projections towards someone, by the way. So you can write these down and really work them through. And we also go through it in the course as well. We go at like crazy depth in the course. I'm just giving you a little preview. So search for the origin of the projection within your own personal unconscious or the collective archetypal world, meaning ask questions. Do they remind me of my mother or father? Do they play a godlike or hero-like figure? Do they play a villain to me? You know, so you want to understand the kind of images that you're templating on them from your personal unconscious with this. So, you know, if you tend to have mommy issues or you had a traumatic relationship with your mom, then look at how the first place I look to is actually my mother relationship whenever I project on a female, and my father relationship whenever I project on a male. And I find that's fairly accurate. So we have this like kind of series of complex reactions and unconscious reactions that we act towards men in our life and women in our life, depending on what our kind of archetypal experience of the masculine and feminine were. So that's important to distinguish. So what are some common triggers that you have come up with women, with men? And we're going to get into it more into relationships when you go into the anima-animus piece.
Yeah, that's an important piece, but it's also easier said than done. Even I can see of myself when you grow up, you know, a lot of quote unquote abuse doesn't have to be overt abuse, but more developmental trauma, right? Over time, when our needs were not met or our parental figures were projecting, they're trying to fulfill their needs through us, or neglect on, you know, on more subtle levels, or being shamed, you know, and we're not aware of it. And most often we then tend to normalize the abuse.
Yeah. And then on top of it, keep in mind that the first 7 years of life, that children are responding to the unconscious atmosphere of the childhood home. So you see that in courses, like we have it all the time in my coaching. People are like, oh, I had a great childhood. My parents, you know, paid for me to go to university. They did they met my needs in all these ways, you know. Okay, great. But like, what was the unconscious atmosphere? What was your parents' unresolved stuff? How much did they try and make you live out their unresolved dreams? Like, all of this stuff is happening unconsciously. Exactly. So it's like what they actually did and what they said, you know, like that says nothing for the unconscious atmosphere.
Unconscious atmosphere in light of, you know, whatever unconsciousness your dad or your mom had, even unconscious anger. Or anxiety always looming as an infant, especially the early developmental years. These are key 1 to 7. You pick it up, and then you can go even deeper, which we're not going to do here, but definitely go deeper in the course. It can also relate to past life experiences. Yeah,
and then not to get also stuck on the past life experience, because remember that every single past life that you've ever had is accumulating right now in the present moment. Right. So every single, and we look into this in evolutionary astrology as well, is that, you know, your early childhood is basically a continuation of your previous lifetimes. I mean, if you don't believe in past lifetimes, I can't help you here, because I do, and I'm not gonna pretend that I don't. But you know, like, we're working on these certain archetypal themes that kind of bleed into the early childhood environment. So that's just, let me just continue though. I want to finish this.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, you know, you're looking, okay, who do they remind me of? When have I felt this way before? And then keep in mind, so, you know, again, this first 7 years of early childhood, it more translates in our adult experience through not so much conscious narratives, conscious memories, but bodily sensations, emotions. So we don't necessarily know the origin of stuff that happened in that first 7 years of life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's also not about, you know, necessarily consciously remembering or visualizing or seeing what happened.
No, yeah.
It's more also like connecting with that feeling.
Exactly. So sometimes you can get a narrative. Sometimes it does, like, so when you're getting, when you have projections towards someone and they remind you of someone, maybe they remind you of your mom, maybe you can get a memory of, like, you know, 10 years old or even in high school or something, you know. But if you don't actually pick up like a conscious memory, but you feel the emotion really strong, it could mean that it actually happened in those 7 years, first 7 years of childhood, when you were still forming an ego sense of self, basically. So just kind of being open to that. And then just noticing and I actually name this. So if I notice myself kind of projecting on someone and having all sorts of negative interpretations towards someone, I literally ask myself, what do I not like in this person? What qualities am I seeing? And then I ask myself, are those qualities that I hold within myself either temporarily, or have I had those qualities in the past and I judged myself harshly for it? Or if you say no to all of those situations, then can you imagine a scenario where it would make sense for you to demonstrate those qualities that you're seeing in another person?
Yeah, a very good classic example of really understanding projections. And it's tricky because the ego mind likes to justify, indulge in the projections, right? Gets in the trap of superiority. For example, like, I could never do this. How could this person, I would never do this, and kind of like, only see it in another person, and project evil externally in multiple forms, right? But not see it within yourself. And what that means, that also has been very misunderstood. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have, acting out on all this darkness, evil, for example, but acknowledging the potential within you. That's a core understanding, especially when you go deeper into Jungian psychology, in light of understanding that all is one, right?
Exactly.
In the collective. So everything is accessible. Everything, we all possess the potential for the highest good and the highest evil, so to speak, within ourselves. It doesn't mean that you act on it.
Exactly.
But the more we project it externally, and then that ties into virtue signaling or moral superiority, I'm such a good person, I could never do this, how dare you do this, and all these kind of things. Mm-hmm. That's a sign of a dense, deep shadow.
Yeah.
And that can come up then pathologically, neurotically over time, and can also, which you talk about in the course as well, manifest even in disease and physical illness and all of that, if you really understand the body-mind connection and how unconscious stuff we haven't retrieved on multidimensional levels can also then manifest in illness and disease as well.
Exactly. So there's a great quote by Elizabeth Pomez, a Jungian analyst I found the other day, and she said, "I felt at first that acceptance of the shadow meant agreeing with those parts of myself. Gradually, I came to realize that it was not the case. Accepting and recognizing meant making those aspects of myself conscious. It did not mean necessarily liking them or condoning them, but accepting that they were there." So, like, even if you're dealing with the most psychopathic, sociopathic person, so that's an extreme situation where people are often like, I could never be like that, right? It's just to imagine a circumstance where you could become like that. Or because even in past lifetimes, I can guarantee you, like, we've all been terrible people. We've all been great people. We've been every single flavor of human in our past experience, unless we're a very young soul. And then we've been every kind of animal. But you know what I mean? Like, so we want to just look at least for the seed of the potential within it. Okay. So that's the next trait. And then just, so that's the first step. So just, I'm going to just go through them again. First, to recognize the projection. Second, to recognize there's a difference between who this person truly is and the positive and negative ideas you have about them. 3, become curious instead of taking them to be fact. 4, search for the origin of the projection. So who do they remind me of? Do they remind me of my mom, dad? Do they play a godlike or hero figure to me? Notice all the qualities that you don't like about them, and then ask yourself, do I have that quality within myself, past or present? Have I demonstrated that trait at one point in my life? Do I currently demonstrate that trait and I judge myself harshly for it? So just kind of using that process for self-inquiry, and that's how we bring it to consciousness.
But I also want to really emphasize that this self-inquiry, this curiosity, so you're more objective about it. It creates also what it needs, I feel, the prerequisite, a high level of sincerity and humility. Because if you just do it mechanically, ego consciousness would just, no, I would never, these kind of things, and really like go way deeper with it. And also, I just want to add to what you just said before, taking back our projections, being aware of our triggers, taking full self-responsibility for all our experiences, right? Doesn't imply that you now need to become best friends with the person, you get maybe triggered by or
no, it has nothing to do with it.
Nothing to do with it. Doesn't mean you project love and light on them. In fact, you still need to make your boundaries clear as well. It doesn't justify abusive relationships or any of that.
No.
Right?
Like,
just
people misuse this in all sorts of ways. This is meant to introduce you to who you truly are. It's a step on the individuation process. So as long as we're projecting qualities onto the external world and not asking ourselves, where does this come from within myself? We're not actually seeking self-knowledge, basically.
Yeah, we're doing shadow dance. We're stuck in Plato's allegory of the cave, distracted by the shadows on the wall.
Yeah, I'm so much more curious about my own reactions and my own interpretations and my own emotions than I actually am about, I am curious about other people, especially in our group coaching. I kind of have to be, but like I am working through this process always. And the reason I do that is because I really love people and I want to find out who they truly are beyond my projections. So that's kind of the goal that you get, is like, as long as we're projecting on people, our loved ones, our family, our friends, even our pets, actually, we're unable to see them who they truly are. And until we can see people as they truly are, true love does not have the possibility to arise, because we're dancing with our illusions with them. So that's what we want to do, is like, all of life is relationship. We all want better relationships. I'm sure even if you're the most isolated person in the world, you wish that you had someone who truly saw you, connected with you. What you're looking for is you're looking for someone to really see you beyond their projections that you have of them. And the more that you can actually do that with other people, the more I truly believe that the soul will open up to also attract people who are able to do the same with you. So I just want to finish this podcast by talking about the alternative treatment. So how to work with projections when it is you who is being projected on. So that is going to happen all the time. People are going to have all sorts of ideas about you, which are actually based on their own personal shadow material and their own personal unconscious. So it is really important to just recognize that it's happening literally all the time. Like very few people, I think, even your most, even the people who love you the most will still have some degree of projection going on, I think, So we just have to recognize and have compassion for the fact that this is happening all the time and people are going to project on you all the time. It's just,
especially also in intimate relationships.
Yeah, it's just a fact. So number one, this is easier said than done, but see if you can neither resist nor encourage the projections. So, if someone is projecting and be like, oh, you're just an awful person, or you're the most amazing person in the world, see if you can stay neutral to them. That may not be possible, though. And if you can stay neutral, it means that their projections are likely activating also unresolved unconscious material in you as well. Meaning there's a part of you that believes their projections. It doesn't mean that they're true, but there's a part of you that believes that it's true. So that's really key. So
especially negative projections you're talking in this case, right?
Both, so like I don't want to take either of them on, because I personally accept that I'm a human being. I have good traits, I have negative traits, they're all a part of me. So there's never one certain trait that encompasses the whole of who I am, essentially. So, so when there's a part of you that's very resistant to the content of the projections, basically the projections tend to touch upon core beliefs about ourselves that we're trying to avoid or acknowledge that are there. So again, doesn't mean that it's true. It just means that they're touching on something within me. So for example, and I've talked about this in other podcasts, I've been called a murderer, a white supremacist, evil,
controlled opposition.
Not that so much, but anyway, the evil one was really interesting to work with, because for people who are into astrology, people who have Pluto in Scorpio or strong 8th house or Scorpio templates, that is a very common core wound, mainly because people with these kind of karmic setups have actually been through awful things, have done horrible things. So there can be a part of you that even believes like, I'm an evil person, I'm a flawed person. So I've worked with that, and I've actually resolved a lot of my unconscious kind of trauma from lifetimes through working with these projections, because it hurt me. So if it hurts you, if it really lands, if you stew on it, that's a sign that it is activating unconscious material within you, And if you can't let it go, that's key. If your mind races, and especially, what usually happens with projections is we tend to try and rally the troops, rally the people around us. So we tell the story to like every single friend, looking for them to validate us, looking for them to justify, oh, this person is wrong, I'm not like this, right? So we tend to kind of look for almost encouragement to support our shadow projections.
Yeah. And especially on social media, when people then go on the shadow dance frenzy. Everybody's supporting each other's projections and getting all the dopamine hits by quote unquote shit talking.
Yeah.
But I also want to add to that, these are the entry points. So whenever you're really triggered and there's a deep emotional response to that, right? So there's something for you, as Laura just said, to inquire. But also the key point with staying neutral, like that's the end, quote unquote, aim, right? This is what I call, also we go deep in the course, 0-point non-reactive consciousness, no attack, no defense, not being faced by praise or attack,
yes.
right? Not like the self-importance of the ego kick in or the self-diminishing effect, right? Self-pity and all of that, all aspects of the ego or wounding and trauma. But we can use these triggers consciously in order to inquire within without making it, taking it on from the other person, right?
Yeah.
In that sense. And these entry points, I want to just also bring it up, which we also definitely go deeper in the course, are also then entry points for other forces, occult forces, entities, where he will exaggerate that, right? And feed off of all the projected emotional illusion. That's what we're seeing happening in the world, basically, right?
Exactly.
It's like a huge shadow dance of people projecting and triggering, and all this fabricated emotional illusion is food for otherworldly beings. Rudolf Steiner literally talked about this, and many others, Sri Aurobindo and in his work, and people are aware of my work know about that. But the core point, nonetheless, is to close and clear the entry points. And the entry point is the necessary deep shadow work to inquire within, right? And integrate the shadow. And it's easier said than done, right? It's easier said than done to not take things personally, right?
Yeah.
It always still lands. It still lands for me as well.
Totally,
Certain
yeah.
people say it for me, and I use it. Okay, there's something within me that nags on me, instead of launching a counterattack or putting the other person down to make myself feel better, right? Which is just a symptom management and just get my ego involved. No. In that moment, that person actually becomes your greatest teacher. That's the irony. In that moment, your enemy is your greatest teacher.
Yes.
Right? Because as long as you have these emotional reactive triggered responses, you give away your power.
Exactly.
You actually have no true freedom within that self.
So everyone who triggers you is a teacher for you. And also the reason you want to work on your triggers with other people is because anyone who triggers you also has power over you, essentially, because they can get you emotionally riled up. They can tag into your wounds. They can make you spiral into whatever, So it is really like people tend to not, and I think it's because it happens so unconsciously, but people tend to want to also justify, avoid their projections. They mostly rationalize them, not realizing true spiritual power is to retake those projections back and sit in, as Carl Jung said, the house of the gathering, which is basically the psycho-emotional atmosphere of your own unconscious, sit with that and be with that and just let it show you who you really are. Let me just finish this. Is that okay?
Yes, go ahead.
So, it's really important that we don't also accept the projections when they're positive projections, because that can be another ego hook, meaning a part of our identity may feed upon this image that this person is projecting upon us, whether it's a positive or negative thing. So just being aware that this can not necessarily be negative things that people say about you, but the overly positive things that people say about that you almost get this overinflated ego from. And I'm not talking about healthy self-esteem. So someone's like, yeah, that was a really great thing you did, or I appreciate you, and you can actually link that with a healthy sense of self. I'm talking about this overinflated ego that's like you literally feel like you're invincible kind of thing. There's a difference between a healthy sense of self-esteem and an overinflated sense of self-esteem.
We're narcissists, basically, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So, and so understand as well that projections can completely possess a person and they can take over their conscious mind. So, basically remember, this is a really great tool too, to understand people better, that the projections are a reflection of their own unconscious. If you want to take it a step further and you don't actually want to say this to a person, but just use this as a way of developing deeper awareness, is a lot of things that people say about you are actually things that they believe about themselves.
Literally.
Yes. So a lot of the shadow projections we see, if you just ask yourself, is it possible that this person actually believes this about themselves? Then you can open up a whole rabbit hole of just information. And I'm not saying that's always true, but just being open to be like, oh, interesting. They're projecting contents of their unconscious onto me or another person. Is it possible that they believe this about themselves? So just looking at it that way, not taking things at face value. So, and remember that if you accept their projection, immediately you're going to get into a defense mechanism. So you're going to either attack or you're going to defend yourself, and that's because a part of you accepts the projection. Something in you believes it to be true. Hence, it's important to inquire about the origin and work through those things. Like self-inquiry is really the name of the game when you're working with your own psyche. And it even helps to even have other people too. Because for example, because our ego tends to justify the triggers, other people, like for Bernhard and I, we can actually notice when we're shadow projecting. And then we're willing to actually invite the other person to look at what's going on there.
Yeah, I just wanted to really emphasize what you just said. That's a key point. And it's a tough lesson. It was a tough lesson for me as well. The moment you really justify yourself, get to the defense mode, over-explain yourself, you accept the projections and attack something within you. And you actually shadow dancing, right? Instead of using it to resist, the mind. Again, the mind is the trickster. The more unconscious you are, the less you have the ability to self-observe and be self-aware. Your mind will automatically make up a story, justify the trigger, project it externally, go into defense or attack.
Yeah.
And then also, quote unquote, the matrix has you. That's really the underlying frequency, right? Also divide and conquer, and something else feeds off of all the projected, triggered emotional loosh.
Yeah.
So that's really easier said than done, right? But use it as self-awareness. Or I'm getting very defensive here. I'm trying to justify and rationalize myself. What does it say about me, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it wouldn't bother me, if it wouldn't have not these traits within myself, what I'm projected on deep down, or wouldn't remind me of something, it would not faze me at all.
You would not defend yourself. Like even like some of the words, some of the most awful things that people said. Like the other day, I literally got called a murderer. And I was like, I'm not a murderer, So that's an example of like just not like it doesn't impact me. It literally doesn't land anywhere within me when it's a projection that I don't need to work on. So we don't need to always work on every single thing that someone says about us, but we want to notice when it really lands somewhere with us, when it causes some sort of emotional reaction, when it touches in a vulnerable place within ourselves. And then keep in mind, in a split second, if it does touch in a vulnerable place, immediately your ego will hijack that. And it will be like, oh my God, I got to say something back to them, or I got to tell them how it really is, or I got to defend myself, or I got to show people who I really am.
Welcome to social media.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It happens in a split second. That's why like just taking a pause when you notice some sort of trigger within you, when you notice some sort of emotion, some sort of strain within you, using it as becoming curious, using it as a process of self-inquiry is really just such an important tool during these times, because this is happening all the time and it happens so quickly. You really got to learn how to slow yourself the F down and just reflect, pause. There's real magic that can happen when you pause and start to inquire. And then you can really, that's bringing things to consciousness. Essentially, the moment that you're taking it inwards, you are bringing something to consciousness and you're using it as a form of understanding yourself better. So yeah, so we're nearing the end of the podcast and we're going to get more into the animus piece, which is also an aspect of ourselves we tend to project outwardly, mostly on the opposite sex. So we're going to, this more relates to, opposite sex type relationships, the animus piece. And it's actually kind of good that we covered the basic projection in the first hour, because the second hour, like this animus piece is only once you've really mastered the shadow piece and you have some sort of hang of it, So this is more like, actually Carl Jung has a great quote. He says that shadow work is the apprentice piece and animus integration is actually the masterpiece. I would agree with him about that. And if you think if this is new to you or whatever, we're going to go into way more depth about how that plays out.
Yeah, and also what I want to dive deeper into, that ties into the topic of animus and also the topic of attraction. What is true attraction? That's really one, especially in romantic relationships, intimate relationships. And if we observe it deeper, most initial attractions are, based on positive projection, as we talked about, or unconscious material, even just basic egoic lower nature desires, mechanical, biological drives, mistaken as love, or this is my twin flame, soulmate, perfect partner. But it's really important to understand the animus interrelationship when it comes to attraction, because most of the time when we are, quote unquote, we think we choose or our intimate partners or relationships consciously, but most of these mechanisms or dynamics are unconscious. The way we are attracted to people or people that are attracted to us most often happens on unconscious level, unless we become more and more aware of our inner life, of our shadow, our positive, negative projections, of the anima animus interrelationship and all that. So we definitely get more into that into the second hour. Also, like in light of relationships, talking about growth versus fixed relationships. We have mentioned this in another episode as well, but we go deep into that in light of this topic as well. And again, this is just a small overview of what we're going into way more depth in our upcoming 12-week private group coaching program, Time of Transition, Embodied Soul Awakening, starting April 11 until July 2nd. Enrollment and applications start now. Go to my website, veilofreality.com under courses, or you can also apply directly at awakenapply.com. And with your applications, then we get back to you. Again, only limited space available. And last but not least, if you're not already a member on my website, to get access to the second hour, you can also sign up for a membership, also support our work, and you will have access to all the podcasts, all the 2 hours, 77 episodes now. And there's a lot of, it's a big library of knowledge, information that can definitely already help you in your personal life and for the times we're in. With that being said, see you all shortly in the second hour.